Walsh, and I'm a film director, and I've been asked to host this session where we're going to be speaking to people who are involved with music and film in various degrees. I have to get this out of the way first, folks, and I don't mean to be facetious, but this is being presented by IMRO, Pulse College, Screen Training Ireland, First Music Contact, as part of Hard Working Class Heroes. So there you go, okay? So that's that. And today we have a number of very interesting people. I don't know, most of you are involved in music or film or both? What would be the case here? Hands up the people who are composers. That's quite a lot, okay, so we've got mostly composers here, okay. Obviously, just from my perspective, I'm going to be asking questions that are going to be really kind of from a filmmaker point of view. So, but really the purpose of the session is for you guys to be able to jump in and ask questions of these guys. So, I'll start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work and their careers and their areas of expertise. And then I'll start asking questions, but I think it's quite safe to say if you want to jump in and ask a question at any stage, because I know we can move on a topic and then that'll be forgotten and we'll have to go back to it. So don't hesitate to put your hand up or shout or whatever, and we can stop and ask a question, okay? Right, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves first, and maybe we could start with Sarah Glennane, who's a music supervisor, etc. So can you give us an introduction to what basically what you do? Okay. Yeah?
Hi. Hello. My name is Sarah Glennane, and I suppose I'm a music supervisor. My background is working with musicians, and after 12 years of working with musicians, I spent a lot of time working in publishing, and from that, I sort of interacted with a lot of filmmakers in Ireland and felt that there was a gap between the film and music industries, and I had filmmakers ringing up saying, "What's a master license?" So I wanted to get more work in this area. So far I've worked in a number of feature films. I've worked on some TV documentaries on a film that's a music documentary. I've done some historical based shorts that are on loop in a museum somewhere. And I've consulted on all different stages of projects. So at the beginning, when the music has perhaps gone on to somewhere else, I've kind of worked on a feature recently where a record label has come in and they're providing all the music. And in other films, I've just done the licensing and clearing stages. So.
Yeah, that's good enough to start with, definitely. Okay. Richard. Richard is a composer, first and foremost. Would I be right in saying that, from the United States?
Yes.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Are we on? Yes, we are. My name is Richard Bellis. I am a composer, film and television. I also am a teacher and an author. I have a book called The Emerging Film Composer, which has been around for a number of years now. I taught at USC for 12 years in the scoring for film and television program. Taught at UCLA as well in their film scoring program. Was the president of our society, the Society of Composers and Lyricists in Los Angeles, and currently serve on the board of directors of ASCAP. And I have one very lonely, very singular Emmy from a mini-series called Stephen King's It.
Congratulations, terrific. Could we have Victor? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Victor's from IMRO. Victor Finn.
Victor Finn's my name. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Irish Music Rights Organisation. Before that, I was the Managing Director of the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society for many years, more than I care to remember probably. And in that role we would have completed synchronization licenses on behalf of songwriters and music publishers during a time when they would have assigned and mandated those rights to the Mechanical Society. Increasingly, most major music publishers and independent publishers now license those rights directly. MCPS would still be involved in doing some limited synchronization deals on behalf of writers and composers who haven't assigned their rights to a music publisher. Since joining IMRO, we took on the administration of MCPS in around 2009, so we effectively have a one-stop shop licensing operation for areas of exploitation where both a performing and a mechanical license are required, and that would be mainly in the online area. We can go into the mechanics of sync later, so I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Victor. And finally, James. James is the CEO of the Irish Film Board, but has previous history as an entertainment lawyer, so he's had quite a little bit of experience in clearing music, music licensing, etc. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Hello, my name is James Hickey. I'm the Chief Executive of the Irish Film Board, and the Irish Film Board's role is to provide funding for the production of feature films. We also provide funding for feature documentary films. We're involved to some extent in relation to funding TV animation series as well, and we obviously have schemes of short filmmaking. And we also are, through our Screen Training Ireland arm, involved in training, and obviously Screen Training Ireland is one of the agencies which is involved in organising this event. From my own point of view, as the Irish Film Board, what we want to do is encourage the development of Irish creative talent, and of course Irish creative talent includes the Irish composers of music for films. And that would be very much what we would want to see developing is the use of Irish composers in connection with the feature films that we provide funding for. My own background before I was the Chief Executive of the Irish Film Board was I was an entertainment lawyer, and obviously one of the many things I was involved in was music licensing, music clearance, and like all lawyers, I represented both sides of the fence, as it were, because I represented both production companies on the one hand, and I also represented composers on the other hand. So it was, I was able to see it, as it were, from both sides of the equation. Not on the same deal, as Victor says. I have that particular experience and background as well too, and I mean, obviously in that role, I was very much keen to see the protection and enforcement of copyright, because that is obviously of vital importance to composers in terms of the protection of the value of the music that they're creating. So that's an area which we can perhaps talk about as well. Thanks.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Okay, well, where to begin? I know from my experience that, when it comes to making a film or a television series, unfortunately, music is considered, but is not the highest thing on the agenda in terms of a budget or in terms of a priority, which is wrong, really. As Richard said earlier, most film directors think, why do I need music? The film's going to be, the story will tell itself. It's going to be fabulous. You don't need any music on the film, until they watch the film afterwards and they go, something's missing here, Now, thankfully, I personally have a bit of a musical background, so I always valued the role of music in motion pictures. But it was very hard to, in my experience, convince a producer of the worth of putting enough money aside in the post end of things for the music, whether it be songs that would need to be cleared afterwards, or the classic example is the credits, the music that the credits roll over at the end, which is actually probably one of the most important pieces of music in a film, because it's the piece of music that you leave the cinema with, and it's the piece of music that either has you hop, skipping and jumping out of the cinema, or slitting your wrists as you leave the cinema. So it's a really important piece of music, and often it's a song that you remember and you associate with the film. But it's always thought about after the film has been made, unless the writer has actually taken the time to, and has had the balls to actually say, this is the song for the end of the film. Now, the producer can always turn around and say, well, you might think that's the song for the end of the film, but if you want that as the song for the end of the film, you're going to have to forgo your fee, because that's what it's going to cost to clear that song by John Lennon, or whoever it might be. So, I guess, just to try and break it down in order of events of making a film and how music, the approach to getting music, whether it's composed music or songs, the first thing I would say, going on what you said, James, is to start with the script, and if there are any tracks or particular songs that are essential to the story or essential to the action of the picture, that would need to be interrogated first in terms of rights and clearance, etc. Would I be right?
Absolutely, Kieran. One of the things that lawyers should do before people even start shooting the film is read the script just to see what clearances the script will need. And there are a number of areas where clearances are important, but one of them is references to songs or people singing particular songs in the script. And I will say that scriptwriters have a great tendency to pull songs from all sorts of sources, places, without very much reflection about whether in fact that's something that's going to be licensable from somebody else. And I think you'll find that the screenwriters don't tend to regard it as part of their role to get the music that they are including, effectively the song or the music they're including in their script, cleared. So that is something that really is really important, because there's no point, I mean, if you think about it, the cost of film production is such that if you shoot for a couple of days, based on the fact that that scene has to have that song in it, and you haven't got that song cleared, you are obviously going to have a huge problem, because you've only two choices in the end, either paying an enormous amount of money to clear the song, or reshoot the scene, both of which will cost you a lot of money. So in practical terms, it is really essential that people clear if there are particular songs in a script which are part of the storyline, part of the narrative of the script. They have to be cleared before you even start into the shooting process, because the cost of the mistake is too great not to do that.
Now, there have been cases, obviously, in the past, quite famous cases of films and film directors who have really thrown caution to the wind. The most famous case is probably Mean Streets, the Martin Scorsese film, where he decided he was going to use the Rolling Stones and he was going to use Be My Baby by the Ronettes to start it off, that Phil Spector had made. And he'd shot with these tracks in mind and basically the film went into the cinema without any clearances at all. And it was only because Robert De Niro happened to be John Lennon happened to be a friend of Martin Scorsese somehow, and then John Lennon had a word with Phil Spector saying, you can't be taking those guys to court, let them go. And that's the only reason that it actually was let go. And it didn't get released on DVD or video or shown on television for years later, like 20 years later it was shown. So it tied the film up for so long, and it wasn't a hit in the cinema when it came out anyway, it just tied the film up. So it's really important to, if you want to get the film out there and that it's get seen, that stuff is dealt with early on in the process. Once that's done with the script, I think the next step, am I right, Sarah, would be for a producer and or a director to approach you to kind of talk through the process of either marrying a composer with the director, if he hadn't got one or she hadn't got one already in mind, or to get you involved in selection of possible tracks that could be used in the film.
No.
Here, do you want to borrow
one? Sorry, yeah, and even at the script level, you can bring in a music supervisor, and I would say you can develop a map of the music for the film, and you can listen to the script, so read it with your ears instead of imagining the visual implications of the script. So they're in a car, are they listening to the radio, or is it a CD belonging to one of the characters? What type of music do the characters like? What's the geographic location? What's the era? All of these factors are so important and will come up at the post-production stage in making the story believable and just marrying the visual with the audio. And I think a lot of that work can happen at script and pre-production. You can approach a music supervisor then. Then you decide not every TV production or film production might require original score. It might be all licensed music, or if it's very low budget, they might use facilities like production music libraries like they have in MCPS or the other online ones. Or it might be like that beautiful film Silence that only had the song at the end. But you have your musical identity and then your musical map. And once you have those, then you can source composers. I would say always look for between 3 and 5 possibilities. And likewise, that you have a list of tracks that are cues anyway that may need tracks to be licensed for. And if you know, like if it's written in the script, they're listening to Depeche Mode, and there's a particular need for that you know how much that Depeche Mode track is likely to cost. Also at this stage, the budgeting needs to happen. And people say, how much budget for music? I'd say enough for whatever your film or project requires. It's generally.
Is there a percentage you could?
Well, I think that it should be representative of the overall film budget, and certainly when you go to source music, the people the owners or the composers of the music will want to feel that they're getting a reasonable share of that overall budget. So if it's a $2 million film, you know that they're going to want, say, 3,000 or 4,000 to clear a track of a certain. I mean, everything is so different because obviously the more you've heard a track on the radio, the more expensive it's going to be. But the rough guide would be somewhere between 8 and 13% of the overall film budget should be set aside for your musical needs. That's in your kind of standard drama, and with TV as well, it should be considered as a percentage. TV is a bit more complicated because people can avail of blanket licenses for domestic broadcast, but in this day and age, it's more likely that you're going to want your TV production to go on to other territories where the blanket won't follow. So I think, you know, at that stage, it's important that you're considering.
So in that particular instance, it's interesting you brought that up, the idea of television.
Yeah.
I think probably an example that everybody will know is Love Hate, which has used a number of fairly big tracks in it, you know, from different periods, like not contemporary, like right back from the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
But yet when it was released on DVD, they were replaced with, I don't even know if they were sound alikes, I think they were just other tracks.
Yeah, I haven't, and I would be really interested to see that version of Love Hate.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but
because they're all high impact usages, and I think it's a real shame that the producers wouldn't consider perhaps even replacing some of those with tracks by people who you could clear for the whole life of and the exploitation of that program. And the easiest people that they would be the people here, the Irish bands.
There would be. I mean, but you know, you're talking about replacing Jimi Hendrix with, you know, Duke Special or something. I don't know, or whoever.
My motto is that everything is replaceable. Everything, every piece of music, every cue is replaceable.
I don't know if Jimi Hendrix would think that would be very nice.
I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I believe that it is now. You may lose some of the impact, and you'd certainly lose some of the I suppose the recognition and the value that having such a well-known track adds to your production, that your audience are going to, you know, kind of infer some of Jimi Hendrix's love onto your production as well. But then weighing that with what the foreign audience are hearing I think there could be a better balance, you know, and it's understanding the cues, understanding what it was about that Jimi Hendrix track. Is it a lyrical cue? Is it, you know, referring to what's happening on screen, or is it a juxtaposition where it's kind of
or possibly just an indulgence.
Or just an indulgence because you have the blanket license.
And they've got a blanket license. I mean, actually, maybe Jimi Hendrix is replaceable, you know, because, I mean, they've made a film, all by my side, about Jimi Hendrix's life in London before he became absolutely a megastar.
Yeah.
And they didn't manage to clear any of his music.
Wow.
They made a biopic without clearing any of his music. And apparently it's really good.
Yeah.
And whatever music they put in that wasn't Jimi Hendrix music is perfect for it.
Yeah. But I think it is possible. It's just understanding the cues and the role that the music is playing in that scene and what value it's adding, and then you can find that. I believe anyway. I haven't been unable to come up with good alternatives.
Right.
Like I said earlier, there was a scene shot with a wedding crowd dancing to a particular scene where the director had kind of made that fatal mistake of using a track that wasn't cleared and wasn't clearable on their budget anyway, and we managed to sink another track in, and it was quite a specific because the people in the wedding were a type of I suppose they were like a kind of group of people, so the music was saying a lot about what this type of people would be dancing to at a wedding, or would be getting.
It wasn't the Birdie song, was it?
I feel like I shouldn't say what the film was. No, it was a traveller wedding, so there was a lot of and you know, and again there was strange cues, and this was The King and the Travellers that I worked on, and the director was very keen to get Johnny Cash used because he cast a lot of travellers in the film. 50% of them came up to the auditions with Johnny Cash T-shirts. So this was what he wanted to give back. And we did manage to get one Johnny Cash track in, Sunday Morning Coming Down, which wasn't written by Johnny Cash, but his performance was a master's. And in the end, I managed to contact his son, who kindly gave way to that. But there's so many different reasons why a particular piece of music is, I suppose, is entertaining the director and his vision, and it's about kind of prizing that information out of the director's head and then being able to put it into different factors, and then you come up with an alternative that will, you know, kind of, whether it's the tempo, whether it's the genre, whether it's the kind of the raspy voice, or whether it even and that's one of the things that music supervisors I think really provide, is that communication and negotiation, because music's incredibly difficult to talk about if you're talking about it on an emotional level.
You know, that's actually very interesting, because it brings me on to what I think is probably, for a director anyway, the most important aspect of the process, which is marrying them with a composer. Now, good directors know a little bit about every aspect of filmmaking. You know, they know a little bit about the production design art department, they know a little bit about directing actors. Well, they should know a lot about directing actors, but there's a lot of them out there who don't. And there's a lot of them who know a lot about cinematography, and that would be their forte, and they wouldn't be afraid to talk to actors, unfortunately. And then there's a lot of them who just don't know anything about music and don't know how to talk about music, how to actually talk on the same level as a composer. I mean, which is a difficult thing, you know, because music is subjective, you know, and you know, what sounds echoey to one person might not sound echoey to another person, and that's very broad. But so how do you bring two people together and make them feel comfortable with each other, both personality-wise and also that they can actually talk to each other on the right level, that one understands the other and one isn't going to get frustrated, and that the result is not going to be disappointing for both parties?
Yeah, well, I think...
That's not too much to ask.
Well, like, maybe Richard could answer it better,
Well,
but
yeah.
I do feel that that's one thing, particularly if there's a lot of composers in the audience, that's a really important skill that a film composer has, is that they understand the relationship between the visual and the musical, and that they can discuss it on lots of different levels, whether it's the pace that music's adding, or the tension, or the emotions, and that they can find words to talk about that, and so that they can express their opinions on what they will ultimately create as music to a director or to the producer in words, you know, or we can hum it out. I think again, time builds relationships, and I think that's why it's important to bring it in early, and maybe, I don't know, that you have stuff like composer contracts done up quickly, so that things that break relationships, which are confusions over money or confusions over, I didn't know I had to pay for the choir, this kind of thing, that they're all done away with, so that then the relationship is free to become a creative one, and hopefully a collaboration, and the composer can go on set, and that's but.
Yeah, Richard, you'd probably have.
Well, absolutely right. The relationship between the composer and the filmmaker is the most important skill, way more important than music. I do a workshop every year for ASCAP, the Film and Television Scoring Workshop. And in it, we use 4 scenes, and there are 12 composers. So each scene gets scored by 3 composers. And you can see very readily that there is no one right way to score any scene. They all work. And it just depends on what the director is going to like. We face a very interesting time now as composers, because there are so many people entering, aspiring composers. A composer is supposed to be 2 things. He's supposed to be an expert and a servant. A filmmaker has to know that when push comes to shove, he or she is going to get their way. No question about that. But at the same time, we're supposed to bring an expertise. We need to be able to disagree without acrimony. Filmmakers have creative differences with all their department heads, editors, cinematographers, actors. But when we have such a large group of aspiring composers, the tendency is to take the safest path, which is I won't make any waves, I'll just do what I'm told. And that really doesn't serve the filmmaker or the career of the composer all that well. So that relationship is extremely important, and the most important skill of all is the conversational skill, the skill of conceiving dramatic terms. You asked about, how does a director speak with a composer on the same level? Well, they shouldn't. The director should speak to the composer as he or she would speak to the actors, to the writer, and the composer should make that transition. As a matter of fact, translation, pardon me, if a filmmaker says, I like guitar, well, you have a big problem now. Is it Segovia? Is it Eddie Van Halen? Is it dobro? Is it mandolin? Is it slack key guitar? All of these decisions now have to be made. So if you can tell me who the guitar player you're referring to is, or the flute player, or whatever it is, terrific. But on the other hand, if you can tell me what it is you like about a guitar's sound, if you like the warmth, or if you like the simplicity, the intimacy, these are the words that communicate with the filmmaker. Not tempo, not any of the musical technical terms that we know. I'm sure there was other parts to that question. I don't remember. Sorry.
Does anybody have any questions at this stage? No? Okay. Yes.
What about when you have a film and trying to get clear music for it, as opposed to using the original recordings by the artist, doing a new recording, in a way, classical of all these new recordings for.
So Victor, you probably ought to shed some light on that.
Yeah, Well, you've two options. You use an existing recording, so you negotiate the rights for both the publishing, the underlying copyright on that recording, and you also negotiate the rights for the use of what's called the master recording in the trade. So you use the original, U2 version of one. The alternative is you just clear the rights to the underlying copyright work, the musical work one, and you go off and record it separately in the studio, and the production company or the film company would, in that case, or if they would own the recording that they've made, but not the musical work. So you'd still need a synchronization license for the underlying musical work, but you wouldn't need a separate license in that case. But you do have the attendant costs, obviously, of going into the studio to re-record.
And do you, do they have to give you permission for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Not to do a re-recording. The synchronization license that you get for the underlying musical work, you will say in that you're doing a new recording of it, and that will be part of the clause in that contract. If you're using the existing sound recording, the U2 version, yes, you'll have to get a license and authorization for that in advance.
What I mean is it a lot easier to get the license? No, apart from the cost.
Apart from the cost, it is.
They didn't want people using their music to film.
Yes, apart from the cost, it is, but it can be costly. If you're doing a worldwide license and you want a sound recording, you're using, you could be using 2 or 3 minutes. It's going to add up, and it can, in some circumstances, suit the movie that you do a new recording, you want a fresh version of it or whatever. But the easiest way, yes, subject to cost, is to use the existing recording.
Like, say with all the things you are in Jimi Hendrix film, I haven't seen them yet. I don't know if they did re-recordings of Jimi Hendrix songs, new versions of them. No.
That's the original.
Why they weren't? Was it they couldn't afford to get the music, or was it they're not allowed? They weren't allowed a license.
I'm not sure if the Hendrix estate allowed them, is that right?
No, I don't think they were allowed to do it. In fact, it's about the early career of Jimi Hendrix, so to a certain extent it involves cover recordings rather than recordings he himself. Yeah, so it's a particular short period in his life when he was living in England rather than when he had moved on to become as famous as he did. It was a particular period he spent in the UK, which is what the film is effectively about.
Up until 1967, when he, the Jimi Hendrix experience just started, and it was like just the beginning of that, and then it stops. So it's him going from America, we're in Seattle, or whatever, to London, swinging London. And I think so. A lot of the stuff would be like, blues stuff, like the Red House and all those kind of blues classics that he did. But they couldn't use the original recordings. They had to get guys who play as good as Hendrix, I guess, or almost as good as Hendrix.
I mean, as you can see, the challenge if you want to use an original piece of music as recorded by a particular recording artist is that you have to get permission both from the owner of the music and from the owner of the sound recording. And they can very often be completely different entities in terms of who they are, and may not even necessarily be comfortable working together in particular circumstances. So, but if you want to use the track and the music on the track, you need 2 permissions. And lawyers will tell you that when you're using third-party music for feature films or for TV drama or anything else like that, the most important lesson to remember is that if you want to use original recordings of original music, you need 2 clearances every time. You've got to find out who the music publisher is for the original music on the record, and you've then got to find the record company that owns the sound recording. And as I say to you, in some circumstances they can be quite different entities, not necessarily working together at all.
Never underestimate the time it takes to locate that and to do a deal. Don't leave it. If you're a producer, don't leave it till the last minute, which often happens. You'll be well aware, sir. It often happens.
When I was practicing as a lawyer, when people would come into me and say, I have this great idea for this 1970s movie, and I'm going to use all the music from the 1970s as originally recorded in the 1970s, the first thing I would say to them is, for God's sake, don't. Because from the point of view of the level of work that involves and the level of pain and grief caused to try and clear all that music, it becomes almost a dominant part of the film. I mean, in the same way that somebody thinks that that would be a great theme for the film to use, for the sake of argument, 1970s music, equally it become a dominant legal nightmare for the filmmaker if they're trying to actually clear a large number of tracks into a single film. And frankly, the advice that lawyers usually give to people when it comes to music in films is, for God's sake, get an original composer to do the soundtrack for the film and try to use as little in the way of third-party music as you can.
So, speaking on behalf of the filmmaker, I would say, don't let that frighten you going after what you want, because, you know, sometimes where there's a will, there's a way. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is a guy who writes commercials, and he was involved in the writing and making of quite a famous National Lottery commercial that used Elvis Presley. It's the one where they made a rainbow out of two jets of water sticking up in the air. And they'd written in that Elvis was going to sing this song, and the National Lottery were just like, there's no way we're going to be able to afford Elvis, and there's no way we're going to be able to clear Elvis. They're just not going to let us. So he said, look, can we just try? Can we just try? And they tried and tried and tried, and they found a version of the song. Apparently Elvis used to do these scaled down versions without all the instruments, scaled down version of the track. You might know a little bit about this, but a scaled down version of the track, which was actually even more suitable for the commercial. And it was Elvis singing in it. It was the original recording. And they got it for, I wouldn't say a song, excuse the pun, but they got it for a lot cheaper than what they would have normally got it for, you know. So
Well, they got it.
they got it.
Yeah.
It wasn't anywhere near what they thought it was going to
Oh,
cost.
don't forget, there's a lot of different versions of well-known songs that are out there, so you don't have to go with the
The original artist version necessarily. There are many different versions of one that might be clearable. Now, whether YouTube, for example, in that case would allow it to be used is the other license that you do need, though.
But a caution would be, don't try and make a sound alike. There's been much litigation about, and we used to do it all the time when I started off. We would just take verbatim the track and recreate it, bring in a singer that could imitate the artist. And there was a large suit, I think Bette Midler was the first one. And so this is absolutely verboten now, and cost you a lot more. One of the things I might just say while we're on this subject of how much things cost to license, and in many cases this is in the $20,000 register. So if you're using 3 songs that are expensive to license, that will eat up a big portion. Well, thank you. That will eat up a big portion of the budget. So when you hear as a composer that the music budget is X number of dollars, please ask the question if licensing is contained within that budget, because you could end up with 15% of that budget if there's a lot of licensing at high rates.
Yeah, and my advice would be to hire a music supervisor and see if you can license those tracks. But when you're considering using place tracks, the first thing you have to do is research and identify the owners of all the copyrights. And even if it's a classical track, you may need to get performer rights as well, a third right. Or if it's some very well-known songs that have been sung by covers, they might be written by 3 or more writers who might be represented by different publishers. So it can be really tricky, and it can be surprisingly easy as well. Or sometimes you might love a kind of very contemporary Icelandic track, and the band are publishing themselves, and they're on tour, and they're impossible to track down. So that can equally be tricky, and time is the only thing that will really help you in any of that.
I think I had an experience where we had to clear a lot of clips from old movies, quite well-known movies, like The Searchers and The Quiet Man, and actually a lot of John Ford films. And what was amazing to me was, in the clearance of these tracks, it wasn't just clearing the clip of film, but you also had to get permission from, if there was music in it, you obviously had to clear the music, the composer, and the mechanical rights of it. They also had to clear anybody who appeared in the film, like John Wayne or Jimmy Stewart, whoever, who appeared in the film. And if they were dead, you had to approach their estates and clear it with their estates. And they were concerned. They were always concerned that the character would be shown in a bad light.
Yeah.
That's what they're mainly concerned. It's not about the money, really. It's about their. And the same with the composers. They were just like, apart from the money aspect of things, they wanted to make sure that it wasn't being shown in a bad light. So there's a load of things that needs to be cleared in this particular instance.
Yeah,
And it wasn't.
very much so. When you approach people, they want to know the storyline, the plot line for the film, and they want to know what's happening when their music's being used. They want to know who's distributing it, who's the producer, what the cast is, what the background, what the likelihood exploitation of the film will be, and budget. Budget's very important. That's the first question.
Budget.
Yeah. What's your budget? And some musicians as well. I think sometimes it depends on the life cycle of the song. But if say you're trying to clear a hosier track, they might feel like, well, it's been in 5 films this year. We're not going to put it in any more films because it'll be overexposure or overexploitation. Or you might go to a track that's nearing its copyright life. The composer died 86 years ago, and they might be trying to earn as much money as they can from that track before it finishes. So there's lots of
Variations,
different-
yeah. There's a chap over here who had a question. Yes?
I just have 2 questions. When you're clearing somebody else's song, composition, whatever it is, it's not something we ever covered in film college, which it was not a question I've ever asked. Is it possible for an artist 15, 20 years down the line, of an existing composition where you secure copyright, you secure the mechanical rights, but then they turn around and say, you can't use my song anymore? Is it actually possible for them to actually have that music stop?
Normally, the synchronization license would be in perpetuity, so that you can use it for the life of the copyright in the music. Normally.
It's worth saying that every film that is professionally made has a music cue sheet, which has a list of all the songs or all the music in the film, including timings and everything else. And then usually attached to that as part of the delivery of any film to any distributor are copies of all the music licenses for each of the tracks, which are third-party tracks in relation to the film. And each of those are always checked to make sure that they provide for a license in all media now known or to be invented worldwide in perpetuity.
The second question I just had was, when you're approaching both music publishers and actual record labels that want control that copyright of the film, is it easier to secure a deal if you say to them, well, you control the rights for U2's catalogue and the Black Sabbath catalogue? Is it easier financially as well as contractually for you to approach both the publishers and record labels and say, if I license him, or do I get a better deal?
Probably not. It's not. The bulk deal doesn't work because there's different people on the tracks, there's different writers involved, and whereas if you went to one publisher who happened to have 10 tracks they want to use, it depends on the contracts they have with their writers, and you know a lot of publishing contracts will have to go back to their writers to agree to fees anyway, so they won't be in a position to do, you know, a sort of a bulk deal arrangement. It may help to speed up the clearances, but I in terms of how much they're going to charge, I'm not sure, any of them will do a huge deal that way. If you have one license, you can go to the record label and say, look, I've already got the publishing clearance, I now need the sound recording clearance. It may help where you have one, vice versa, and you go to the other and say, I already have a clearance for one. It may help that way, but financially not so much.
There's another question there, yes?
Just in the changing world of the value of music, how is there an equation for an unknown track relative to a track that's internationally famous? Or is that an impossible question? Is there an equation of the worth of the track, of the value of the track?
You mean how much you can charge?
Yeah, an unknown track, if somebody wants to use that, how much is it worth, say, to an artist, or how much the track worth, say, to
the better known the artist, the more expensive it is in general.
Yeah.
And an unknown act, if you want to get into a TV program, you know, some acts starting out may take the view that they want the exposure now to get themselves into TV programs. In the past, synchronization licenses were almost an add-on onto income streams after you had, you know, become had chart success with an album or whatever. Now at the start to try and get their music into TV programs or whatever. But there's no equation, but if they're more well-known and more successful, they will charge more. But there's no, I see what the question is, and it's very difficult to give you, you know, it's 90% cheaper if you're starting out. It doesn't really work that way.
No, in fact, just to say something which I wanted to say earlier, but you should negotiate every time, because I mean, as Kieran says, you know, sometimes you can get a very famous track licensed relatively cheaply just because you've persuaded somebody to do so.
Yeah.
It's always worth trying if you want to use it, but
Johnny,
I think you have to accept the reality.
Yeah, the negotiation is a huge part of what the music supervisor should bring as a skill set is the negotiation. And like you were asking there about the equation, it all depends on how much the film needs the track. Like if they feel like they can't replace it, then the position of power is within the copyright owner, whereas if they're like, well, you know, you're one of 5 indie tracks we could use here, then obviously the power is more on the filmmaker side, and perhaps you know, so it's a negotiation thing, and the main factor will be how much the overall budget for the film is, and the music budget, and how much you're spending. And there's a lovely term called most favoured nation, where master owners and publishing owners anyway try to get equal amounts for both sides of the track, and then sometimes you can, if it's a lower budget film, you can say, well, we're going to pay all of the artists use the same amount, this is all we have. And you know, if Bono's your uncle, you might get U2's track for that amount of money as well, but it all really depends. And if you're dealing with an estate, I think then you have less likelihood of selling a personal story, say, but it can help in the synopsis. It's really about timing, you know, it's that. And I would certainly say to any filmmakers here, if you're looking to use a track, that you would have 2 alternatives lined up, so that you don't go into a negotiation with the desperate look on your face of saying, if I don't get this, the film doesn't get made, you know. You would have
Can I just say something for the composers in the room, because we're talking about licensing. And this is something that isn't very often done yet. But as the front end for composers goes down, and we depend more on the rear end, there is no reason that you can't license a score to a filmmaker who doesn't have a lot of money up front. Just the same way songs are licensed if there's not a lot of money up front. And we were talking about, or mentioned, was license in perpetuity. You don't have to do a license in perpetuity. Let's say you're working on a film festival film. Nobody knows what the life of that film is, or what the distribution possibilities are going to be. So you may want to say, I will license you the music for 1 year, exclusively or non-exclusively, depending on the circumstances, for X amount of dollars. And as a matter of fact, just to be a good guy, if it looks like this film has a life, a continuation, then I will give you the opportunity at the end of that 1 year to extend that license in perpetuity, or make it exclusive, or make it non-exclusive, whatever. But just know that these possibilities are open in a world where front-end fees are being reduced daily. And there are lots of options for you to place value on your music, which is very important. It cannot be valueless. You have to get 3 sheep or something that's important to that person for your music. So this licensing the score itself is another option, just for you to know about.
I just wanted to ask one question about lengths of duration of tracks, you know, that are used. And my experience is it kind of comes in 30 seconds, a minute. It goes in 30-second increments.
Yeah.
that is the case, and so my understanding also is that if you, say if you're using, I'll give you an example of what happens with a music supervisor, a very good music supervisor I was working with, which I'd never come across before. So I had a song playing in a nightclub, and then it cut away, and then obviously somewhere else, okay? But it was continuous time, and then it cut back to the nightclub, and the same track is still playing further along the track. So we had 20 seconds of a scene in the nightclub, and then we had another 15 seconds away, and we went back for another 20 seconds in the nightclub. And the supervisor came along to the mix, and he goes, okay, so technically there's 2 cuts there. But if we make the mix here and now, that the track doesn't stop, but it's played so low in the mix that you can't hear it through the scene where you cut away from the nightclub, then it's equal to 1 cut. Did you ever hear about that?
I've never come across that, but
You've come across it, yeah?
yeah, I could imagine that because
I
that.
thought it was pretty clever, it saved us a lot of money actually.
Yeah, like you do find because if you're having a wedding scene again and then you fade the music for the dialogue, or they're going out into the toilets and the action happens and they come back in, and all the different ways that you can make the music sound realistic. So yeah, that would make sense to do it like that. I think one of the things for music owners is the minute point. That's our track is now a featured track, which means that it has become more instrumental to the action. And
After 1 minute.
Yeah, that would
Continuous
be kind
minute.
of a rule. Yeah, that's and also that anything that's over the opening titles and closing credits is likely to cost double the usage within the body of the film.
Not something that's used in the trailer as well, as obviously.
Yeah. Well, you can ask for trailer rights within them. So, but just that you're cognizant of all of these things when you're budgeting for music and when you're applying for funding. I don't think any of the funding providers are against giving money for music, but I think it should be laid out probably a lot better in at the budgeting requirement stage. And even with the BAI for television productions, if you are not covered by a blanket license, which is entirely up to, as far as I know, the broadcasters, it's at the broadcaster's discretion whether they let you avail of their blanket license. So if you aren't and you want to use tracks, then that you can put that in as a budget requirement, and the BAI should consider funding it anyway. But I wish, from my point of view, that there was more, I suppose, support between these two creative industries, and that the BAI would recognise Irish tracks being licensed, so that the funding for those will go to Irish musicians, where the BAI is pulling their money from, radio and television, so it's from the output of all of these creative people. And I don't know if it happens. And I know, James, you're a big kind of, I suppose, but you do the advocator of using Irish music, and that the funding, the Irish Film Board funding, would then go to support musicians' incomes as well.
Absolutely. From our point of view, we want to support Irish creative talent, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Irish composers are a vital part of the creative mix that goes into making a film. And I'd like to see as many Irish composers as possible writing music for film, writing scores for films, and that these films would then, see worldwide opportunities. I mean, I think from an IMRO point of view, and I haven't confessed a small confession, which is that I'm also a director of IMRO, amongst the other things that I do in my life, and I think we are seeing that international income is coming into IMRO.
Absolutely.
Particularly from the use of Irish composers' music on, or IMRO members' music on television throughout the world, television programs. That level of income it's an interesting development, increasing significantly. Has it? Yeah.
What's just with regard to parody? There might be a different ruling within doing parody. Say if you have a comedy program or a film that is parodying an existing track. I mean, in a worldwide term, it could be something like that. Eat It track that Weird Al Yankovic did based on Beat It. But it could be anything where you take a track that, I mean, Spitting Image used to do it quite a bit, and the Savage Eye do it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, in those instances, is there a different kind of thing?
Two instances, if you like. We've mentioned blanket licenses a number of times. Just to explain what a blanket license is, a blanket license is entered into between the Mechanical Society, in particular in Europe, with local broadcasters in each territory. So MCPS here in Ireland would have a blanket license with RTÉ, TV3 and any other major channels here. It allows any independent productions that they are commissioning and paying for to be included in their blanket license. So effectively, the broadcaster clears the rights for the independent producer. The effect of that, though, is that the independent producer has to give up some rights in order to qualify for the blanket to the TV station. If, for example, an independent producer wanted to exploit that outside of Ireland, they would rather go down the route of clearing it themselves directly and not relying on a blanket. But if it's an Irish-only production and it's covered under the blanket, it's effectively pre-cleared. So you can use music and simply report it as your queue, and RTÉ or TV3 will report it through to MCPS, and it'll qualify for payments under our blanket payments. On the parody, if you're clearing a parody, there's normally an uplift. If you want to use a track and you're putting in different words, there's normally an uplift in order to clear it. It could be 25 to 50%, but again, it's subject to negotiation. So if you're using a musical work and you want to put different words to it, and you're using the same melody as somebody's melody, you need to clear that and the parody that you're putting to it. So the composer or the publisher in that case will have to clear the use and the actual parody that you're using. In the blanket license, as long as you're not treating the work in a derogatory fashion, and I accept that that's a subjective term, it will be included in the blanket. So it's probably, dare I say, it's slightly easier in that they're not subject to individual clearance. It's part of the blanket license, so you might find some things you might think, yeah, that is derogatory. But as long as it's not treating the work in a derogatory way, you'll find it's included in the blanket. We've never had huge issues in terms of composers coming back and complaining about how their work was used under the blanket with RTÉ or TV3 or anybody locally here.
But internationally, if you're to sell it internationally, or if it were to go onto DVD, that parody is subject to 25 to 50% uplift.
It depends. If you're going on DVD, it can be a separate license altogether.
Okay.
Because normally you will only clear it for broadcast rights. The blanket only covers for Ireland. If you're going outside Ireland, it has to be pre-cleared, and we had an example of Love Hate before, where they re-bedded the music, and I believe they used library music in the export version, and that would have been done on cost grounds. And there's a balance here as well, in fairness to the film producers or the program makers. If you can only get so much for revenues for exploiting it in other territories. And sometimes the fees for music, if you're using the music that was in the original, that went out in the territory, it can be prohibitive, has to be said. So they will, in some cases, put back in library music and go in and re-edit the music. It's a shame, but that's what happens. But it's a very competitive international market for TV programs. It's, the amount of revenue you can get from overseas channels, it is very, very competitive.
I mean, it's funny, like, if you were to watch, if you were a buyer from a television station abroad and you were to watch Love Hate, for example, with the tracks that were in it, and you decided to buy it, and then you received this version with library music in it, I think you're going to be pretty disappointed.
Well, I suppose it's buyer beware, isn't it? I'm sure in the license they would know full well what they're buying. I doubt if it was supplied with library music and not having told them that look, it's not the original music here. They would have had to be upfront about that.
So there's a question there, Darren.
To go back to your previous conversation, I'm just wondering if you're in a position where you're negotiating syncing one of your songs. Is it sort of normal to ask a bit of information about how much of the song's been used, or if it is being used at the start or over the credits? Therefore, that give you a bit of control in terms of looking for more fee? Or
Yeah, absolutely. The how it should happen in theory is that they will forward a license request form to you, which will include the name of the title of the production, the director, casting details if they're relevant, like if they're known, the synopsis of the film, any distribution that is already in place for the film, and then the music usage, which will give a timing, how long they're going to use, and what the usage will be, what scene will be happening. So if it's opening titles, it should say opening titles running into opening scene. If it is, say, a source, which would be, it might be a visual source where they're sitting in the car listening to the radio and it's your music that's on the radio, and they should say that. And if it goes from source into feature, where they might kind of pull back and allow the audience contemplate whatever's going on with music getting louder, or they'd be, or kind of background, just a background usage. But absolutely, you get as much information as you can, and certainly how much they have to spend on music and how much they're spending on the film overall, and then you come back with. They can usually there's like a kind of a hint of, well, this is kind of how much we have. So if you can kind of say that's your fee, that would be brilliant. But there's a little bit of push and pull in it.
so that's, you don't just scare them off as well.
No, exactly, and I think it's a very difficult time for musicians at the moment. And I know one of the things we were to talk about is exposure, and the idea that somehow you're going to get this wonderful exposure for your music from this production that doesn't have any distribution in place yet, and therefore you should give your music for free. I think that's completely misguided from both sides. I think it's like you can't expect much unless you can give a value to it. And when I worked with musicians, that was my insistence always, that there's money is exchanged, but sometimes filmmakers can be surprised at how little you might be willing to exchange for a track that maybe, that's an existing track that isn't going to earn it otherwise, and the hope is there that the royalties might come in, or you think the production has value, or you went to school with the director, or whatever the reasons are, but that at least some money changes hands, and that you have the license documents should be given to you, and then. But in terms of exposure, I think it's up there with winning the lottery, unless it's. But even in love hate, you can't tell how an audience is what's on they're going to pick up on, and then all rush out to buy because they heard. And I think it's very few placements that works for, and generally it would be a feature placement, which is the music coming forward, and then whatever is going on, it's the music's helping the watcher reflect on what's going on.
You can die from exposure.
Yeah, well, that's that's very true.
I think you mentioned earlier about you touched on the life of a copyright. I feel like I've read or I've heard rumors over the years that after a certain period of time, say 50, 60, 70 years, a song enters, I think, is it called the public domain?
Yeah.
Is that the case, and does it just become, I guess, up for grabs at that point?
70 years after the death of the last surviving composer or author of the piece,
Okay.
it becomes public domain. Yes, and when it's in the public domain,
Anybody can effectively use it then. You don't need a license to use it, but don't forget, if there's a recording that you're using that's still in copyright, you may need to get the clearance for the recording. But most of the time, if the work is out of copyright and the original recording is probably followed it out of copyright as well. But once it's more than 70 years after the death of the composer or author, it's in the public domain and you don't need a clearance. You can use it.
What about a song that's just kind of out there? So the classic example being Happy Birthday.
Oh,
or
that's in
Lullaby or
copyright.
something like that. That is in copyright. So
Yeah, but it's in.
Warner Chappell, isn't it? Is it Warner Chappell?
It's in litigation.
Well, EMI were willing to charge me for it. It's in litigation, and even without the litigation, I think it's got 5 years left on their claim, which is the arrangement done by somebody, I don't know how many years ago, but that would be the classic example of a song that you would expect to be in the public domain, but because it has so so much value somebody's managed to claim copyright, and then when stuff's in litigation, that might mean that either it's frozen and that you can't use it, or it's not worth using. So the get around for that is to have someone singing "He's a Jolly Good Fellow."
But isn't it the lyrics that were?
Well, that's what they're saying. These were two elderly ladies that are ASCAP and Warner's, yes, has the copyright. You know, it's in dispute because, yes, once it was found that it was a drinking song at one time and in the public domain, then it became the lyrics of "Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birthday to You." So it remains to be seen, but it's a classic example of a director putting a piece of music in the film without checking. I've had to replace it at least twice when the actor was mouthing "Happy Anniversary to You," I had to write another song that was in that tempo, and we brought in a singer. Fortunately, the man's head was in the camera most of the time, so we could replace the vocal. But yes, classic. I worked on a television movie that was to air on Tuesday, and I got a call on Friday that they hadn't cleared. It was a Donna Summers tune. I don't know whether they hadn't cleared the performance, or because it was a performance, or they hadn't cleared the copyright of the underlying work. But you know, it was going on the air on Tuesday. They tried to negotiate, and you just don't want to negotiate in that position. That's the worst position you could possibly be in. So we replaced it over the weekend with another song. Not a happy situation.
There's another question.
Tarantino told a story about how he wrote the script for his project. He wrote the stuff in the middle with you. He wrote that into the script, and then he said he regretted it because he was kind of over a barrel when it came to negotiation time.
Yeah.
Just the point that you made about having two or three characters, do you think that, you know, that scene in particular where the character's kind of doing some of the lyrics, it's very intertwined with the story? Is it worth shooting two or three different versions of the scene with different alternative songs?
No, I think at that stage, if it's in the script, then you make sure that it's clearable and that you have enough money to clear it before you go to shoot. You don't. I would complete. You don't shoot with the song, with the track, unless you have located the copyright owners and found out how much.
But I'm wondering, is it worth it being in black and white in the script as opposed to a song comes on? Are you in a worse position for negotiation?
Well, that's a funny thing, you know, and I spoke to somebody who was doing a script writing course actually, and they were talking about how to introduce drama to a script, and I said you should talk about music, because I believe that the script writers should have a say in what music they're imagining, because you're not writing just a visual thing, you're writing an oral and a visual story, so that there should be, but then when like that's a factor when the script is coming to pre-production, you're going to look and see, and I'm sure it's possible to rewrite it if the script writer really wants their script to come to film, and the only way they can do it is at a budget where they can't afford Stuck in the Middle of You or whatever they have written in that the script writer could come in and rewrite with something that they can afford, or I don't know. I think the earlier you bring music in, the better, and I think it really shows. Like in one of the films I love is the French film Betty Blue. Their soundtrack, because they play it on the piano in the film, and that really, I don't know, just to me really adds to the score. And that obviously happened early. That score must have been written before they shot that scene. Sorry. So I hope that answers your question, you know. But just that if you any reference to music in a script, if there's a busker, you know, if they trip over a busker's guitar case on the street, what's that busker singing, and can you clear it? Because you have to clear it, you know. So, and then if your budget only allows something that your brother wrote and he's the busker, then make that the best usage that you can, you know, and if your budget allowed you to be singing used and
well, Tarantino is a bad example because he doesn't use the composers at all. It's always a source song to inspire whatever scene he's at. So he's not really a good example for.
But he uses other scores.
Sorry?
Scores from other films. He takes scores from other films and sticks them in.
He's a bit of a magpie in that regard. I don't think he's ever worked with the composer on an actual thing.
But I mean, I think each production has its own musical identity, and some can allow that there's no original score, or that you are using so many place tracks that you can't afford to bring in a composer, and then you might be using, like Richard was saying, maybe licensing some production music that exists. Maybe you know Richard, you could ring him up and say, did you do a score that wasn't really used that you could license me some of it to put in, you know. There's many different variations, but understanding your musical requirements early and understanding that every production has a different musical identity is really.
I have two recurring things. One is people doing scores for free. And really, I mean, I'm not even talking about a lot of money, but somebody qualify yourself in some way. I'm all the time getting people coming in and saying, oh, I do it for free. So it's hard to sort of pitch something to somebody and give yourself worth that people are giving it for free.
Yeah.
But another thing which is really important is leaving the room when the editor has your music. It sounds like a kind of strange thing to say, but editors lately, for me, are just taking too much initiative with something they're given. You know, you write a scene, music to a scene, and then an editor gets his hands on it. And if you don't watch what he's doing and come back and reference it, he can run riot with it.
But understand that we're in the film business, we're not in the music business.
Sure.
So when you write it, you stand on the dock and you wave goodbye to it. Now,
it's like writing a screenplay. You know, it's really just a blueprint for what the film is going to turn out. You know, you write one film, you shoot one film, and what gets cut is a completely different thing. You know, it's just part of the process.
Composers want things locked down because they can't really work if it's going to be extended or pushed by 30 seconds here or whatever.
Yes, although I must tell you that there are a couple of myths. One is the myth where a lot of well-known composers will say, don't ever go to the dub of the final mix because it'll make you crazy. My point of view is entirely the opposite. If you're at the dub and there's a problem with the music, if you're not at the dub, the comment will be, what the hell is that music doing? If you're at the dub, it will be, Richard, can I talk to you about that cue after it's done? The dub is a very expensive place, a very tense place, a very dark place, and the blame will go down the path of least resistance. If you're there, knowing that it's your music and not that the music editor is there to represent your music, it'll be a whole different set of circumstances. Now that said, the music editor is there usually to be your representative, and if something needs to be, this is why we deliver stems. If something needs to be changed, if something's fighting with the dialogue, you know you're going to lose because music will never win a competition with dialogue. If there are stems, if there are 4 or 5 stems, it's possible that one stem can be brought down in the mix and the music can remain in that portion of the film. We get performance royalties on the music that is in the final version of the film, not the version that we write for. So the more music is in the film, the better you're going to be financially on the back end. So a little flexibility or a repeat of 8 bars of a cue that was played earlier because we need something over here is actually a good thing for us. I know. I mean, I know that, you know, it is not that we buy all of this wonderful gear and it's the gear. No, it's us. It's inside of us. If the amount of gear you had meant that you could make music for films cheaper, if that was the value, the more gear you have, the easier it is to do, so we're going to pay you less. Hans Zimmer would be the best bargain in town. You know, it's what's in here and in here that we get compensated for, not for what we do here. This used to be paper and pencil. It's input, whether it's a computer or whether it's paper and pencil, it's merely input, and this is what you're getting compensated for.
I think really what's the reluctance for a director to have a composer at a final mix comes down to the fact that you're sitting in the mix and you're watching and listening to the final mix, or the music's coming in and you're going, I thought that piece of music was going to be right there, but in actual fact it'd be better if there was no music in that scene at all. So you whip the music out and you think, you know what, there's enough music before this and after this, so we need a breathing space here, and we don't need the music to bolster what's being said in this scene. And it's easy to say that, but if the composer's in the room, you don't want to insult the composer, you don't want to sort of like, diminish their contribution to the process, but by the same token, they have sweated over this piece of music, so it's difficult. It's a difficult situation, to be honest.
I understand, but if the person is a professional, I have said in the mix, guys, if you're going to play the music that low, it's really going to be distracting. Can we try it without the music and see how that works? Two things happen. Everybody goes silent for about 30 seconds because they can't believe a composer actually asked to have the music taken out. And then it usually comes back in louder than it was before. And then the other thing that happens is when we get down into reel 4 of that film, and I can say, guys, can we try that up just a little bit more? Sure, okay, yeah, let's run back and do that. So you have to be a team player, and this is part of being in the film business and not the music business. Yeah. And once they figure out that you are there for the good, you will never get an award for the music from a bad film. So you have to be there to make the film better. And then one other thing is that people will say, well, they don't want you there. Well, then figure out when you're going to get invited. At the spotting session, you are the chosen one. You are the one that has been selected to score this film. And you haven't screwed anything up yet. So that's the time when you turn to the director who's sitting next to you and say, I'd love to come to the dub. Would that be all right? What are they going to say? No.
Sure, yeah, no problem. You never hear from them again. On to the difficult and kind of prickly subject of what happens a lot of the time when making feature films in particular. The people that, generally speaking, end up getting fired most on productions are the editor and the composer. And it's almost like the last stop for the producer to blame someone for what they're looking at, And they go, I'm going to fix this film. It's a fucking mess. I'm going to fix this film. I'm going to fire the editor because he doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm going to fire the composer and get new music in. And that happens an enormous amount of time. And actually, it's really not anything to do with the editor or the composer at all a lot of the time. It's purely a way of apportioning blame and kind of alleviating the blame from the producer, actually. And the director, a lot of the time, and I've been in this particular circumstance with a composer, without any choice in the matter, I was told the composer is going to have to go. And I was quite happy with the composer, and I was happy with what we were doing together, we had a good relationship. But they looked at the film and they said, I'm sorry, but it's the composer, we've got to get rid of the composer, we need a new score. And the score that ended up on the film wasn't enormously different to the score that was being done. That wasn't the point. It was like, it's like politics, really. So for anybody who ends up in that situation, don't take it personally. It's hard not to, but don't take it personally. It's my advice, anyway.
I think you're right. And you have to look at a situation like that as the composer saying, does this matter? Do I really want to work with these people again? You have to look with discrimination on those with whom you work and decide just how much you're going to take. On the other hand, this is stretching. This is great exercise to work in a troubled environment and to be able to recognize a potential troubled environment the next time. If you get strange vibes from your first meeting, you may want to have a couple more discussions before you sign on to take that film, especially if it's not for a lot of money, because now you're going to hurt your reputation for no money. If you're going to hurt your reputation, you might as well get a lot of money for it.
Any more questions?
Oh,
I'm not sure I totally understand. The
So-
composer
so-
wrote the lyric?
So let me try to explain. I don't know if so was there, so you get to the end of the film and then the piano keeps playing, or the piano comes in and it starts playing a tune, right? And then all of a sudden, this guy decides to put some lyrics to it. And then it becomes a song. It goes from being a piece of music to becoming a song.
Okay, no, okay. So we haven't done the final mix yet. And the music has been composed.
Right through the credits.
No, right
Oh.
to the end of the film. And then the credits are
Start.
there. So there's nothing over the credits.
Okay, and that's the score.
So the score has been done, yeah.
Okay.
And then the composer, just because they're excited, was like, I'll offer you this song that I've written and somebody else has sang.
And he's written the lyrics too, or she's written the lyrics too, composer.
Yeah. It's a family thing, so they've probably written it in some
It's a group effort.
Yeah.
so they're saying, would you like this song?
And the director
To
says,
use-
yes, it
yeah.
works, and I like it. Who owns it? Like, or do we own it as producers, or
As-
do we have to renegotiate because contracts are signed, everything's done and dusted, they're paid up to a certain point?
Well, you would have to negotiate a separate contract for that piece of music. Because depending on, if you buy that song, like you bought the score, in other words, you own the copyright to the score as the producer, correct? If you want to own the copyright to that song, then you have to create another contract, just the same way that you did with the score. Unless the composer is.
Is it important
did
to
their
you
job,
to own the
yeah.
copyright? Is it important to you to own the copyright, or would the project be happy for the composer then to use the song, say to release it elsewhere, or because it might not be important to you to own the copyright. Like, what's important is that you can use it and that you have the clearance to use it, and for the duration and life and the term, but it might not harm the production if the composer then goes on to release it with their band and then it becomes a hit, then it's kind of adding as well. So I suppose I wouldn't have thought that it was necessarily important for you to own the copyright.
You could license it.
Yeah, and then you can negotiate probably reasonable terms if you say the composer is as excited about it as they are, and the director is also excited that basically it would clear the usage.
So we're not cleared under our original contract. That's what I'm wondering. Like,
It depends on the
Did you
contract.
pay them? How much music did you say we're paying you to do music up until the end of the film and before the credits come in? And then you paid them to do that, then that's what we did. They come back and say, oh, here, by the way, we actually composed this extra song as well that we think you might like. It's a separate job. It's like, totally like, I mean, you can't
They
come back
often
to
throw
all,
it in.
we already paid you.
I know.
Throw it in the deal, part of the deal, a little bonus.
Yeah.
I think it's an extra song. I think you're probably into another negotiation, I think, at that
Yeah,
point.
I mean, they might be happy for if you say, well, we'll just give you, we don't really have enough money now to give you any more, and maybe they don't want a fee, but that they would own the copyright and that within the cue sheet that it is put in, so that any performance royalties will come back to them for that song as well. But if I would think if they went to the expense of recording it, it would be good to cover the costs anyway, and that the performers should have signed over their rights as well.
Can I ask you a question? Do you like it yourself? Do you like what they did? That's positive.
No, I just wondered because it's a new situation that I've been in, so I've never happened before. I just didn't know.
No, normally no one will want to do extra work for no more money. Yeah, that's an anomaly.
There's another question. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. pay for the whole thing, or is it the record label and the publisher who actually the artist?
I think I think the short answer to that is it's a negotiation in each case. It depends on what arrangements you make. If you're the filmmaker, the most important thing you need to make sure is that you have a license of all the music in the film. As for who owns the, for example, the soundtrack or the sound, the underlying score for the film, normally the producer owns the score of a film which is specifically composed for the film. But on the other hand, the producer only has a license of music that was composed separately and is just simply being used in the film, but is also being used elsewhere. So there is a distinction between a specifically commissioned score, which the publishing is normally assigned to the producer. And we'll be honest, that's an area which there has been a fair amount of argument over. So let's not class that as an absolute. And it can be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. But I think what you're talking about, again, all of these things have to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but very often the help of a lawyer in this context is really what you do need, because it does get complicated, as you can see, and I think it's worth making sure that you do have some help, particularly if you're going to distribute and sell the film for public release.
And if you have a contract with them, they should be warranting in that contract that they have full rights to assign the works to you. So, because it may depend on their relationship with the publisher, but I don't think these days that publishers claim everything that's written by an artist. But just that you have a contract which says that they say that they can assign it anyway.
So, a point that you raised earlier on the opening credits and closing credits. It's monetarily more expensive. If you negotiate with an artist to use their songs, you clear all the rights, and you're saying it's going to be in the middle of the film or it's going to be in the pivotal scene, and then suddenly in the middle of the edit, you realise it's got to go to the front credits and the end credits. Do you have to modify that agreement, or do you have to get a new deal?
Yes, you have to get a new deal. Well, you have to go back and say the usage now has changed from background to end credit. So and if they have a publisher, the publisher's going to go cha-ching, and it'll be double fees. Or, you negotiate as you negotiate. But yeah, they're very important, and it's really important that end credit considerations aren't left to end post-production time. I think it's
not an ideal situation to be in.
It's not an ideal, and it's funny because I think what happens is filmmakers start out by saying, it won't really matter what's playing over the end credits, and somehow after the progression of the whole filming and everything becomes so involved in the editing that they want a huge song, inevitably over the end credits. They want the audience leaving feeling, wow. So just bear that one in mind.
So I'm just aware that we did get kind of caught up in a legal quagmire in a way, and clearances and all that kind of boring stuff. Sorry, gentlemen. But I just like to, I'm aware that there may be some budding composers and people who are trying to involve with sound design or whatever it is with regard to film. Sarah, you're probably the best person, or maybe yourself, Richard, the best person to ask, what's the best way for somebody approaching the business to actually try and make a mark and get out there and how to get a start? Really.
How to promote yourself, and because I've worked with musicians, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this myself or trying to do it.
Can you just use the microphone?
I'm sorry, I think the batteries are running. I think there is the ideal is that you would send your music to a music supervisor or to directors or producers, and they'd hear it and they go, wow, that's amazing, I'm going to retain this music in my head until I'm doing a production where this music fits. And that's not going to happen. So the way that I think that the most important things for musicians or composers to do is to be able to identify themselves what they do and then to make that visible. So when a director or producer is looking for music, it'll be quite specific to their production, but they'll go out looking for something based on genre, something based on previous works, or any different ways. And I think the internet is an amazing tool for finding people, but it's also an amazing place to get lost. But that you can tag and sell your music, and I define your music and what you do the most visible way possible. And then the other thing people in America love to talk about is the elevator pitch. Have an elevator pitch. So you can say, in the time that it takes to go from the first floor to the 9th floor in whatever hotel or wherever, if you meet somebody on a plane, that you can say really quickly, this is what I do, and here's my card. And I don't know.
The buildings aren't big enough to do elevator pitches in our
I know, so they have to be really quick, but we speak doubly for
Yes, you have to get into the elevator. So I would say the most important thing, especially for score composers who have a tendency to just enjoy the hell out of themselves sitting in front of the computer and buying new sample programs, is that you got to get out from in back of the computer. In our field, and you all are doing it because you're here, you're not in back of the computer. Jobs come from other people, and you have to interact with other people, and Facebook isn't enough. You have to do the eyeball-to-eyeball meetings with people. Join any composer-songwriter organizations that you can join, not for protection, for socializing. Go to all the functions, meet as many people as you can, and from that will come your opportunities. You get an opportunity to be an assistant to someone, and while that someone may be talking with the director of the film, you're talking with the AD or with the editor, not usurping your contact, but finding someone else on that team who is in the process of elevating themselves, and it becomes your peer group, your colleagues. That's about all. Other than that, there is no route. You know? The example is this: if a director came to you and said, "You know, I've been thinking about the score, and I'd really like to use 6 more cellos, but I'm concerned for you because you've got a package deal, and isn't there more copying involved with 6 cellos? And what about the recording stage? Is that big enough to add 6 more cellos?" Well, if I had a director say that to me, I'd fall over. You know, that kind of knowledge of what I do would be a huge surprise. And the opposite is true as well. If you can say to a director, "Is that a drone, or did you have a crane? Is that a crane shot, or were you on the top of the building?" Talk about the film. Michael Giacchino is that kind of composer. He would love to be a filmmaker. Hans Zimmer is that kind of composer. Know what the director does, what they're up against, and be empathetic and have conversations about their work. That's all.
Angela. Angela's been swearing at me from the back of the room. Profanity's coming out of her. Do you want
17 minutes ago,
Sorry.
I wrote this line.
Oh, right. And then she told you to fuck off. Angela, would you like to come up and tell us a little bit about first music contact?
I'd like to come up and tell you to leave.
I got that a long time ago. And also about what's going on in tonight.
Yeah, just to wind it all up.
Wind me up.
No, just you're very welcome. I'm so delighted that we were able to host this panel. For those of you who are here for Hard Working Class Heroes, it's an annual festival, showcase of new Irish talent every year. There's still there are still actually 37 bands left to play tonight. So if you're around, they're playing in 7 venues around the city. We hosted 15 panels and 1,300 speed meetings here this weekend as part of Hard Working Class Heroes. I was really interested the way the questions were coming out. First Music Contact is our company we run, Hard Working Class Heroes. We also have a website called breakingtunes.com, and there's 9,000 Irish artists on that. It's a self-building website. So with my work hat on, I would love Irish filmmakers to be using Irish music. We're looking at a possibility of building a locked section of that with stems from songs, that if you spotted something used. But if you are interested in just getting in and talking directly to the artist, you as filmmakers and producers can sign up as industry and just listen and get in touch. If any of the artists adds anything to their profile, you get a ping in your inbox saying Hosier has a new track, John Lambert has a new track, whoever has a new track, just on there, so But I would just like to say, in terms of the other questions, we also have 35 fact sheets, free fact sheets on our website. It might be an idea after today to write a really specific one around those questions around composers and stuff, and it's maybe something we could work on putting together and put on both of our websites. And just to let you know that today's panel will also go up on the website, as well as the other panels over the weekend will go up on the website, but mostly, get out. No, it was great to have you, but we have a security man downstairs who wants to get out by 6 o'clock. I don't mean get out, but get out.